episode of Wicked Parley. Tonight we're going to be discussing population, and we're going to be looking at, is it a problem? And we're going to be going through a whole bunch of different opinions and ideas surrounding this particular topic, so hopefully you guys have grabbed your popcorn, grabbed your snacks, grabbed your drinks, and let's get into a nice little discussion about it. And Jacket's now in jail. That's good job, buddy. Okay. All right.
Good job, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, always, get that jail. Yeah, that's important. Anyways, let's first let me just kind of discuss a little bit of these few things before we even get into defining terms. Now, when I talk about population problems as a whole, one of the key elements that I think is important to understand about this is that, yes, I am saying something that probably seems obvious. There are too many fucking people on the planet. All right, I'm going to say that.
That's a way to put it.
Yeah, I'm going to say it, just point out. And that's basically what this is all going to get at. And this is going to be going over a whole bunch of different things, discussing those particular elements. And the reason why I think this is important is because there's a lot of psychological effects and harm that can happen to overpopulation. Things like lack of resources can create a whole bunch of detrimental conditions that are not only bad for a person's health, but also for a person's psyche. So all of those things in mind, we're going to jump into the definitions right now. And the first definition that we're going to discuss is education. Now, this might seem like a pretty straightforward definition, but I'm going to give kind of a twist. I'm going to give kind of like a personal definition of it, and I'm going to explain why. The definition that I have used is a gained body of knowledge that is used to assist in the living or betterment of a society. The reason why I give a personal definition when it comes to this has a lot to do with the fact that there's going to be a section that we're going to discuss that's going to take a look at the knowledge of certain peoples in a society, particularly women, and their ability to be sort of gatekeepers to the number of children that are born. And I think understanding education from that particular lens is important because it could be detrimental to our conversation if we don't understand those terms from that particular talking point. So with that out of the way, we're going to go into the next three definitions, and of course the lovely Rose is going to read the definitions that we have preset. So thank you for a little patience, and we'll jump right to it. Rose, what is the first definition we got?
The main topic for today, population. Specifically, the whole number of people or inhabitants in a country or region. Sounds simple enough.
Yep, simple enough. There is one thing that I think I'll note when it comes to this, is that when we do discuss population, there will be a couple moments where I'm going to maybe differ slightly from the definition from this. Not that it really changes the definition exactly, but more like being a little more specific to population, and I'll mention it as it pops out.
Alright, the next one is environment. The complex of physical, chemical, and biotic factors such as climate, soil, and living things that act upon an organism or an ecological community and ultimately determine its form and survival. A lot of jargon.
It's jargon, but I think it's jargon that we all understand, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Should we get into any sort of issues regarding this, of course, I'll make notes.
And if we get any confusion, we can just clarify any confusion later.
Sure.
And the last one for now, because I'm sure more terms are going to pop up later.
I'm sure.
Sustainable, or sustainability, of or relating to or being a method of harvesting or using a resource so that the resource is not depleted or permanently damaged. Something we are very terrible at doing as a society right now in some scenarios.
Yes, humanity as a whole does a terrible job at making sure that we don't permanently use all the resources that are, on the planet. There's plenty of resources that we use to the point where they're gone. So,
like this tree graph. That's the amount of trees that get cut down on that yearly.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Okay. It is terrifying. And I think for the most part, one of the things I would like to just kind of mention is the fact that when it comes to all these definitions, they're all being pulled from different talking points. So if you ever get confused about a certain talking point, then review the particular definition, and if you don't know, then ask us a question and we'll be happy to respond to it. All right, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and go on a 2-minute break. I know it just started, but hey, 2 minutes.
Give you time to digest all
Yeah,
those little
just
concepts.
digest the jargon. Really, just mull it over in your head, because it's going to keep coming back a little bit.
And feel free to come up with questions and put them in the comment section for us to answer later. Alright, see you in 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Hello.
All right, hello, and welcome back. Hopefully that wasn't too long of a break. All right, let's jump into this particular episode. All right, so Rose, what is the first talking point on tonight's episode on population?
Yeah, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the different perspectives on population. For instance, how do different cultures view population limits and ways of curbing contraception?
Oh
For
man.
starters.
Okay.
Yeah, I know, it's a big whammy at the start.
Yeah, what a large one. Okay, so first of all, I just want to point out this before we continue down this whole rabbit hole. I am just one guy who has read a lot of books, who actively studies a variety of topics. I'm not a person necessarily that is like, oh, I'm all knowing all this stuff, so I make mistakes. These are just my opinions. No, that's where I'm coming from. With that being said,
These are all opinionated.
yes.
But
I guess the first obvious example when it comes down to this is the religion plays such a fundamental factor in the way in which different cultures interact when it comes to controlling population. Some religions, like, practice perhaps, sacrificing people in the ancient past.
oh yeah, I don't know. I
I
remember hearing about that
yeah.
in history class.
Yes. And then there's also some people who are just like, I'm going to have as many kids as I possibly can. And I think that happens more often than not in like third world countries, where there's a high level of infant mortality. A lot of kids don't make it, so they have lots and lots of kids to guarantee offspring.
I'm guessing something like average lifespan isn't that high either in those areas or something.
I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I can definitely say that yes, it's not much higher. It's definitely, imagine what would happen if you didn't have access to medical treatment. How many people who stub their
Life
toe and get,
expectancy would kind of go down.
yeah, how many people stub their toe and die of an infection? Yeah, how many people, would contract malaria and not get the correct drugs? Yeah, how many people would get an arm broken and have no way of fixing it, or leg? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, I think that overall, I think depending on the culture, depends on what they've done. An example is with China. You know, China had this whole like rule of having, I believe, like was like 2 kids or 1 kid or something like that for some period of time. And
It was
depending,
one or the other.
yeah. And so like a lot of people, because you know having a boy meant that you're able to pass on your stuff, would choose guys, you know, choose boys, and so like they would get pregnant, and then they'd find out, oh, that the child's going to be female, and they'd terminate the birth, the kid. So it's like done.
Ew.
And then you get this huge explosion of a bunch of males in China, and not enough girls, and so now you have this huge like influx, and so it's kind of a struggle, and definitely a particular problem. So. There's a couple other things that also regulate things, and that is certain levels of society's will. If you want to think about it like that, some societies willingly advocate for more children, and some don't. And the way in which the countries and places that don't advocate often have to do with the way in which they conduct their lives, usually like the economy. Like typically in the recent times, like in the West. You see that people basically need a certain amount of money to survive, and often that money is not enough to also have and raise children, or at least have and raise multiple children. And so this way they kind of curtail like the amount of children that are able to be born in those areas, and that's why you see, I think it's, well, not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why you see a declining birth rate along industrialized countries. So those are all elements that can be utilized in different cultures, potentially to affect this particular thing.
Why do you think these societies, countries, governments, whatever? Why do you think they create regulations and laws to control the number of people that are born and whatnot? Is it more of a financial thing? Is it an environmental thing? Living conditions?
I mean, that's another huge question.
I'm just throwing all the big ones at you.
Apparently, yeah. Once again, I don't know everything. I just want to really point that out there.
Yeah, but I'd like to hear your opinion.
Okay. Well, my best guess, honestly, when it comes down to this, is probably a little bit of everything, if you think about it. City planners have to figure out how many dwellings there are in their city, which indicates the number of people that they can theoretically house, because you don't want to have a whole bunch of homeless people in your city. So that probably plays a factor in why government would be interested in curtailing populations, or at least having some sort of control over it. Because if you have an explosion of people, then you don't have enough resources to be able to take care of those particular people. People starve, people go homeless, people can't find clothing, etc., right? And the inverse is also true. If you don't have enough people being born, then you can't fill the jobs that are necessary for all the functions of that city, and so it starts to go into decline.
Not without hiring outside.
Yeah, but even then, those have their own problems and are still subjected to the same values that are intrinsically incorporated in the culture at large. So if you bring people from a different place in, it only takes a generation or two for those people to now be acclimated to the conditions of that society. Meaning that the same problems that society is going to experience is going to be imposed on the people's children, maybe 1 or 2 generations down the line, still. So all you're doing is pushing the problem back. You're not actually addressing it.
Yeah, postponement rather than actually dealing with it.
Yeah.
Procrastination on just a larger scale.
To some extent. I think that there are other things that are involved in that. I think governments also probably have an invested interest in kind of having some level of control over every aspect of a person's life. And because, if you think about it like this, in the United States we have social security numbers.
Yep.
We have various agencies that are tracking people's cell phones, internet, phone communications, emails, the whole line, everything, absolutely everything they can to manipulate and have some sort of say in your life. So it doesn't surprise you that they're like, hey, we don't want you to have too many kids now. So,
not too surprising.
Yeah.
Hey, all right. Let's see if the next questions I throw at you are any easier.
We'll see.
We'll see. The general one is, how does population affect the world? So, for instance, what does it mean for the number of resources that we have at our disposal with having a relatively high population?
Oh my god.
Yeah, I know, it's just bigger and bigger.
Okay, all right. Well, oh my god. Oh, why
You're
are
not
we
getting a break with this one.
No, this is just going to be brutal. So I guess we'll start from the basic level, all right?
Okay.
There's only so much land on the earth that can actually grow crops that are harvestable and whatnot. And there's a certain band a little bit north of the equator and a certain band a little bit south of the equator, and that's about it when it comes to like where you can sustainably have large crops, which means that those areas are the only areas that are going to be able to produce the vegetables, the meats, the biofuels that are necessary to power and be helpful to our society by and large. Now, I've heard estimates from various different articles and things like that that range from like roughly about 2.7 billion to about 9.5 billion being the sustainable number for how many people can actually inhabit the earth and still have food, shelter, and basic quantity, like basic things of life, But then you got to start thinking about, okay, as countries start to become more industrialized and they want to start taking on Western values, their diets shift from typically high veggies and things like that are typically used into a more meat-based diet. More meat consumption means you need to have more animals and livestock. More animals and livestock means that you're having less crops and more livestock, which, to be fair, most livestock typically uses up a lot more land than growing a crop.
Yeah, they like to move.
Yeah.
They're actually mobile, for one.
Yeah, and they also, like, the other thing about livestock as well is that they also consume lots of areas of land and its vegetation. So you have to grow a specialized set of vegetation just to feed those cattle. An example of this.
It's a 2-for-1.
Yeah, an example of this is like beef production is ridiculously like costly and totally inefficient when it comes to actually gaining food, because you have to dedicate a massive chunk of land to grow the feed for the cows, and then you have to give a massive chunk of land to the cows. You see, and so it's like this huge chunk of land just for one group. And that's if you're all consuming beef, then that's how much land is being dedicated to that, versus a very small chunk to perhaps grow corn or rice or etc. Those sorts of things. So that's one element.
Are those estimates you made earlier, are they just considering the land that's sustainable, or is it covering like the world as a whole? Do you know about
The
that?
entire globe, like all the area of the globe where animals like that can actually sustainably live. An example of this is that, like, let's say hypothetically you had a cow and you're like, I'm going to bring a cow to the Sahara Desert. That cow may survive. Not well, but may survive. But it will not be able to create a sustainable breeding stock where you can then derive meat from. There's a reason why you see certain parts of the world have certain animals as they know of them, but they're not like, I eat this all the time. And why certain parts of the world are like, oh, I eat that all the time. And then you go to a different part of the world and you're like, oh my God, you eat that? Oh my God, why?
How dare you?
Exactly. So, I mean, I think that that's something that's going to be a little bit more suggestive when it comes to those things. But I think the bigger thing to think about after food probably has to do with minerals and metals. There's only so many minerals and metal that are actually available to the earth, on the earth, period. I mean, let's ignore the obvious gold, silver, platinum, and like other kinds of metals like iron and things like that, which are at varying levels of quantity and accessibility. Let's start thinking about things like salt. If you think about how much salt you can have, right, and how much is consumed and how much is necessary for life, because a lot of people don't realize that salt is very necessary, as is fresh water. Both of these two things are necessary for our health and our well-being. And guess
They're
what?
slowly depleting.
And guess what? They're both in limited quantities.
Salt and fresh water, people. Ding, ding, ding.
And the funny part is that like you could technically pull seawater and you can split it theoretically into water and also salt, and you can have like these desalination plants and they can produce water, but they are so inefficient at their ability to pull water that it takes an incredible amount of energy to do so at any form that would actually produce enough of either to be helpful to a population. So
Unfortunately.
they're very destructive to the environment if you think about it, like overall. And so you have to look at natural salt deposits and things like that. And in the United States, we're very fortunate that we are rich in minerals. I mean, like we have so much stuff. And so like we're very fortunate. But there's other parts of the world that are not, like at all. And so it's kind of like it's important to take kind of like a global look and go, okay, these countries have access to these materials, so they need, if they want to have that same access, they need exports. So it's kind of a big problem that I think a lot of people don't fully grasp. They see their side of things and like, yeah, this is good, but then like the overall whole thing is just like it just goes right past their heads.
It's like great for you and you alone, buddy.
Yeah, I know. Like those senators who like thought that like there's no global warming because it's snowing.
Oh,
There.
almighty! Don't get me started on that.
Yeah,
That's a topic for a rant.
Those are pretty stupid people. So, anyways, I hope that answers that particular element of the question.
Yeah, it gets into the start of it, like
And to be fair,
just land, resource, mineral deposits, not to mention just living areas in general.
yeah, I mean, I also, if people want more questions about this, I actually do know a great deal about this, and so I can continue down this if anyone has any questions. Or if you're watching this in the future and you're like, hey, I'd like to know more, send it in the comments section. I'll take a look at it, and if you want, I can either send you a private email if you want to leave your email address or email the show, or maybe we can come back to it for another episode.
Yeah, email us at awickedparley@gmail.com.
Yeah. Okay, so what's the next question?
Yeah, if we're still on the resources thing for a bit, because
Okay.
you mentioned before, with the beef, more in particular livestock and whatnot, that in some areas, certain types of livestock for eating are more common than in other areas.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
So, because of these differences and whatnot, how does this affect the distribution of resources between the different countries or even between different parts of the community?
I think that it's difficult to really answer that particular question in any direct, like meaningful way. All I can really say is that depending upon the different parts of the world, whatever resources you have, you're more likely to use those resources first. You're also more likely to trade with those resources first. So like, let's say hypothetically you're a country that's an island, then you're probably going to heavily rely on the bounty of the sea. You're going to be a fisherman, are going to be very prevalent in your society, and one of the main exports you're probably going to have is going to be fish related in some way. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all to see that those be the primary interactions that people have when it comes to global like stuff. The other thing to also consider is that, let's say you're landlocked and you're near a desert region, then your options of really anything are going to dwindle. And which is the reason why I would imagine there's so much strife in certain parts of the world where it's very, very, very dry and it's landlocked, obviously. But
Pretty barren of stuff.
yeah, I mean, I would say that like it's not true of every region that's like that, but I think there's probably certain regions that have very few things to offer anything, and so they have to be quite creative. And that's why I suspect that certain areas that are high in oil, not saying any specific regions, but I think we all know what I'm talking about. Once that oil's gone, then they're going to have to find another way to be able to interact with trade. Otherwise, they're going to be in a tight spot. And so they may have amassed a great deal of wealth, but once that wealth is gone,
Or once the source of where they get that wealth is gone, they're going to be in trouble.
then I suspect they're going to need to find another way to be able to interact on the world stage, or they'll have to be in a bad spot.
To say the least.
But I think that like when it comes to population specifically though, because I think one of the things that we need to kind of draw back on is how does resources affect population? Now, one of the things that I think about all the time is the fact that, I mean, first of all, I live in California, okay? And I remember driving past, going on my way to LA several times, seeing all sorts of signs saying water shortage, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And they're saying things like I couldn't grow crops or not enough water, things like that, right? That's California, that's the United States, it's a fairly big state, but there's the fact that we have a water issue means that, like, imagine other places in the world that also have water-related issues. That's a huge problem, and it's something that is necessary for every person who's alive. Now, if you like literally don't have access to this thing, then you're not going to have a population. It's going to be dead. So one of the challenges I think for society in general is going to be how do we regulate environmental needs and funnel those needs to the corresponding individuals who actually are going to subsist off of this. Because if you don't find a sustainable way to generate at least water and some form of food regularly to everyone across the world, you're going to have a situation where you have a bunch of people very, very upset, very, very angry, very, very much motivated to do something about it that are going to be coming towards everybody who has those resources. And I would hate to see a world war that it's fought over resources. Something that a lot of people have speculated as a possibility in the future. And I think that this is one of those things that it would be a great crime if we as a society did not find an answer for this, because it is well within our power to do so. It just requires.
Gosh, that sounds terrifying.
It just requires the effort to do so.
Yeah. It's a terrifying idea, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely wouldn't. I don't want to see that happen. It's bad enough that you could make the argument that the war that happened in the Middle East over the last, basically 2 decades and going, was waged largely on controlling oil in the region. And so you could say that we've already seen on a miniature scale something akin to that. So,
and if that's what we're calling mini, I'd hate to see what we call colossal.
Well, I mean, just think about this. I mean, how many countries had a hand in that particular engagement? What, like 4 or 5?
Plenty
now
enough.
now imagine a world war setting.
No thanks.
Over resources in general.
Nah.
So.
Not something I want to think about.
Okay.
Alright.
So what's the next particular subject?
Yeah. So with such a high population, how does this affect the environment beyond, gathering or using a ton of resources that aren't coming back anytime soon in the relative future? For one.
Okay, you mean like how populations disrupted the carbon cycle?
Yeah, that's one way to go.
Yeah, okay, alright, that's definitely one way to talk about. I think the other thing that we could potentially talk about is the fact that there's human waste. Something that a lot of people probably don't want to think about is what happens when you flush the toilet and where does that go?
Down a pipe, through the ground, and fortunately into the ocean.
Into the ocean, sometimes,
into
or
rivers.
Into rivers, sometimes into plants. And all of these things are problematic. As you increase the population, you are going to overwhelm the system that handles these particular things. So like I think that's one of the main things is just sanitation is going to probably become an increasingly larger problem as we gain more and more people. Now, one of the, I guess, unfortunate truths that came to light due to the whole demonetization virus was the fact that how many people can be affected by one person. Like if one person's infected on a plane, hypothetically that could spread to most of the plane in a matter of minutes. And so if you think about the increased number of people when it comes to just not being able to have sanitized areas, then you could have mass propagation of a wide variety of illnesses just by simply not having clean facilities or a clean way of just discarding necessarily those particular wastes.
Gotta have good hygiene to stay healthy.
Yeah, that's for sure. So I think that's one thing that we could kind of take a look at, and I think it's something we could come back to if anyone has questions about. But I mean, I don't want to dwell on that nasty subject. I think another thing we could talk about when it comes to this is energy, electricity, power, gas. All of these things that we use in our homes, guess what? As more populations start to become more industrialized and start moving towards Western ideals, they're going to want houses. The building materials that comprise a house is astonishingly expensive if you actually think about it. If you were like each individual piece. And on top of those particular things, right, you also have the other issue that is, how are these people going to get the electricity and the gas to actually get these things? Because we've already discussed how running water is potentially a problem in even the industrialized world.
Yeah.
And to think about all the other things that are involved in a house in addition to that, and the fact that people struggle to get some of those things today, just goes to show that this is going to probably be a progressively larger problem as our population gets closer and closer to that 9 billion mark. I've always thought that the best solution to dealing with this kind of thing is simply starting to develop orbital platforms and building space colonies. Because to me, I think there shouldn't be a limit on the number of people that exist in the universe. I just think there should be a limit to the number of people who live on the Earth. And I'm not looking at Earth as like as a special place, but I'm just saying, like, if we want the Earth to be the planet that we know it to be for as long as it can be, as long as the sun doesn't decide to go, flame ball kind of thing, then we need to then we need to take care of the actual planet itself, and we need to be more thoughtful of the way we use the resources that are here and the way we go about living our lives. Because so many people just go, I'm going to use this, then discard. I'm going to use this, discard. I'm going to use this, discard. And it's like you can like build up a mountain of trash in a very small amount of time by making everything so disposable.
I mean, there is an island of trash in the Pacific Ocean.
We're not talking about that this episode. If you'd like to learn more about that particular topic, we have actually mentioned it in a previous episode. So, I believe it was under, I don't know, climate change or something like that. I believe it was under climate change. So if you want to see that, check out that episode. It was a good one. I think it was Climate Change Heated Discussions. It's the full name of the title. So check it out if you're interested in learning about that. Anyways, all of those things are things that we need to really consider. And I think you have to understand, at least recognize that like a place like China, okay, has a very small amount of actual living space, all right? And they have about 1 billion people. Last count, all right? About 1 billion people. And that their entire society in the course of about 2 generations, all right, went from egalitarian to industrial. All right? And they now all want to drive cars and eat meat and have houses and all these sorts of things. And if that happens everywhere on the planet or in a large portion, we are just not going to have cell phones. We are not going to have the materials necessary to make a lot of the modern electronics that we currently use. And so I think we need to start being more careful about how and what we do. And yeah. Enough on this particular subject, though, this particular element of the subject. Let's move on to the next one.
Goodness gracious.
Actually, I was looking at the time. Let's go on a break. Let's do a 2-minute break. We'll come back to you and definitely host the TP shortages, man. Oh my God. Oh my God.
That was just... Ooh, I read a Tumblr post about that, which I can explain after.
After the break, I will tell everyone a funny story about TV shortage.
All right. See you in 2 minutes, everybody.
2 minutes.
Bye-bye.
All right, and we're back. Okay, as promised, I was going to tell you guys that I definitely...
Story time.
Yes, I have a great story when it comes to the whole TP shortage thing. So I realized the moment that the pandemic started trying to shut things down, that I'm like, there are 3 things that I need to make sure I definitely have. And toilet paper, hand soap, and a lot of frozen meat was like the things that I thought of immediately. And so I went to Costco and I bought just an obscene amount of all of those things. Like, I still have toilet paper from last year.
Well,
in February.
Right. Oh my.
Yeah. I bought that much. Like, it was, to be fair, okay, like, so like Costco normally like $20, right? And I like, it was $160 of toilet paper.
Oh my gosh.
But here's the thing about that, all right?
Okay.
The reason why I think it's funny, the reason why was that, like, literally 2 weeks later, that was when people were talking about TP shortage. I was like, aha! I called it right! or I may have triggered part of it. One of the two.
One of the two. Or it could be a combination of both.
Or it could have been, yeah, someone saw me and go, oh, that's a good idea. And then another person saw it and create like a chain effect. I mean, it could have been that.
That just reminds me of the Tumblr post I saw where it was just like for the ones that essentially... I'm pretty sure there are people that exist that bought way more than you did.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure people have garages that are just like all the toilet paper.
But yeah, it reminded me of a post that somebody made. It was essentially for all those who hoarded the toilet paper. You do realize that if you have all the toilet paper, then we don't have the toilet paper, and you're still gonna have to interact with us.
Somebody's having a smelly butthole.
Somebody's having a smelly butthole.
Yeah.
No thanks.
No, thank you. No, thank you. All right. Thank God those times are behind us right now.
Yeah, thank goodness for that.
Yes.
All right.
All right. So now that all that funniness is out of the way, let's jump back into the discussion at hand here with population problems. And what is the next of the talking points, Rose?
Yeah. So we talked about how having a high population affects the world and the environment.
Yeah.
So how does it affect people in general besides those factors? Because obviously everything mentioned before affects people in general, but we're talking like individual scale now.
Okay, so one of the main things that obviously happens has to do with something that's pretty well known and established, and that's like birth defects. Typically speaking, when a person does not get the necessary nutrition when essentially they're carrying a child, often those children are born, underweight, and also have suffer from a series of other complications, which obviously can have adverse effects on a person's health and obviously in the development of that particular child. And it's been fairly well observed that if you don't get the necessary nutrition, it can create mental impairments and other sorts of issues. And so it's a sad thing to see, and something that is definitely preventable. It's called Get Them Food. So
Get them food. That's why you see so many organizations which are like, can we get like non-perishable food?
Well, I would say it's okay even to get perishable food. I would say like we just need to try and find ways of getting food to them and getting like seeds and like baby crops to them, so that way they have multiple avenues to be able to gain sustenance. So that way this issue can be somewhat curtailed, if not solved entirely for them. I mean, obviously some regions are going to be too arid in order to actually have a sustainable crop, but you can do certain things to make small amounts of food that are somewhat negotiable. Because there are some things like, I think like potatoes are one of those vegetables group categories that's very hardy and can grow in a pretty diverse set of environments. So it might be something to consider, trying to at least find different ways of getting things. And I know that they've been working on genetically engineered crops that can handle more harsh terrain and also grow more food. Those are the GMO kinds of crops. So genetically modified organism. Just to know, so people know, a genetically modified organism is a GMO. I'm sure most people here know that though. But I mean, hey, why not? Shall throw those things out there?
So those are like birth defects, food.
Birth defects are definitely a pretty big one. Another one of the big ones obviously has to do with waste. And the
As you
reason,
mentioned before.
as I mentioned before, and waste, as I also mentioned before, can lead to a series of things ranging from severe illnesses to just, having an unpleasant sense of being. And
Isn't that how a plague happened before, like in the past, with all the like waste going out into the streets?
it definitely didn't help. I'll put it that way. It definitely did not help. It definitely helped propagate various
Yeah.
things like that. So, yeah, there's many illnesses that are spread through that particular kind of thing, and proper sanitation is incredibly important. Also, another thing to think about too that's not really discussed too often, but if you're having a hard time, with having children because of birth defects, if you're surrounded by waste, then it's going to take a massive toll on your psychological well-being. You're going to be more anxious. You're going to be more depressed. You're going to have a lack of hope. You're going to be always looking on not on the bright side, but on the downside. You're going to be very gloomy. And these things are all shown to actually harm you physically, in addition to obviously not having a good outlook and not being like striving for your absolute very best. Which means that the overall population, the overall community in which you're residing in, could all be affected negatively just simply by the large group of people all having more or less the same feeling about things, which can really be bad.
Yeah, quick question.
Sure.
About that. With such a high number of people that are essentially feeling this way, whether it's like, negative, like depression, anxiety, stress, that sort of thing, despite the high number of people we have, how often do you think that people are actually getting the support they need to deal with these emotions and stress and anxiety and stuff like that?
I wouldn't even begin to know how to address that particular question.
Dear.
Not on a global scale. There's no way I could possibly say it, because I don't know what's going on in Cambodia or in Australia or Japan or Korea or
fair.
But I live in the United States, okay?
Yeah.
All right, Rose.
Okay, we can talk about the United States. Do you think people are getting the support they need?
No. I mean, here's the thing. Like, at the end of the day, I don't know what's going on in the world, but what I can say is that, obviously, we see people very frequently on the news who are starving. We see people who are ravaged by storms and their whole village is destroyed. I can't imagine that, their whole village destroyed, but their grocery store made it. Like, I don't see that actually being the thing that happened, all right?
One silver lining, however.
Yeah,
your entire life just got uphilled.
Yeah, I just think that, like, there's no way for me to even begin to really tackle that particular thing. And I don't even think I could begin to tackle it in my own, like, city. Like, there's that many people, and there's that much disparity.
That's how bad it is.
Yeah, I think, I live in California. I live in the Sacramento area. All right, Sacramento area has the second largest homeless population, like, in the country. I'm pretty sure. I think the only one that's behind it is LA. And LA beats us by like a lot too, but like but still, I mean, like we're in the top percentage of number of homeless people. So I mean, there's lots of people in my city that aren't getting getting shelter, are not getting proper meals, not access to showers, and any of the things that you would consider civilized or normal like living standards. So I cannot even begin to imagine other countries who don't have the infrastructure and the governmental support to be able to do that. I mean, I imagine like some people, like when an organization goes out and helps out their country, it's like that happens once in like 20 years. Like, it's not like you're like, oh, okay, this is really nice. I'm really happy that for this 1 year we're good. What about the other 19? It's like I'm not saying that always is the case, but I'm just saying that like there is a limited number of resources that any one organization can do, and it requires it's going to require a global concerted effort to really deal with this particular type of problem. And because we're talking about populations here, I think there's a lot of things that we can do to kind of combat this, and there's a segment we're going to get to where I'm going to discuss that. But for the time being, to just try to approach like answering that question. Now, of course, not only do I not think that people get the necessary help, but I also think that the systems that are put in place do not adequately represent the population that they're intending to help. There's a miscommunication on a massive scale when it comes to this, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that these systems were put in place at a time when the population was very small. Now we have a very large population, and the system is basically being taxed to its breaking point. And people are like, I don't know what we're going to do. We're just going to try and do the best we can. And while that's nice, it's a nice sentiment, and it means that something sort of being done, it's not really being effectively done. It's just putting a band-aid on a gaping wound.
That one meme where the vat of water is just leaking and you just put a piece of duct tape thinking it's fine.
Yeah, pretty much.
Ugh.
So, what's the next talking point? Because I don't want to keep on going on and on and on and on.
No. So we've talked about how this affects people physically. We've talked about how it affects individuals emotionally or cognitively. How does this affect the communities and the way they treat each other? If you had to put an opinion to it.
I mean, once again, like, who the fuck am I to, like, say this?
I know, if you had to put an opinion to it, though.
My opinion is that people are the basic person, the one-on-one person, is incredibly empathetic to your particular plight and your circumstance and situation, and likely, if ran into someone who is unfortunate, would be incredibly feel bad and want to do something to help if they could. But societies, city planners, etc., governmental officials, you become not a person but a number, and you become at best a statistic. And you hope that the statistic is shaped in such a way that eventually it does good things and doesn't do harm. Yeah. I think the evidence has suggested that more often than not, you're forgotten about.
Which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and so I think that when it comes to the way in which it affects their emotional and cognitive health of people who find themselves in that circumstance, you create spirals of despair, drug use, abuse, and other forms of mental illness that is exasperated by a system that is taxed and unable to help them. Because the first thing they see when they come across somebody is going to be whatever is the most vile element of an individual. If a person is spiraling and going in a very bad, dark direction, chances are they either have alcohol abuse, or they have drug abuse, or they have both. And that already presents a challenge for interaction, because you're having to fight someone's addiction, on top of being able to straighten them out, on top of being able to address their emotional and cognitive needs, on top of meeting their physical needs. And so you have this huge, complex problem that just builds on itself and makes itself even worse because of the lack of attention that's been given. And I think that a lot of people are at a point, at least in society today, that goes, okay, well, the population of people who are like this are this big, we're just going to excommunicate them. We're not going to deal with them anymore. And so I think this is a huge issue when it comes to discussing what to do with certain populations that don't necessarily fall in line with the society's expectation. And I could go on about this, but I'm going to leave it there. Let's move on to the next one. But
I think I need a quick break from all the negativity. I'd rather take a quick break to chill before we get into the next section, which is how to curb the effects of having such a high population.
Okay, I'm not so sure it's a happy thing though.
It gives me a little bit of hope that we can do something.
Okay, does that mean we are on a 2-minute break?
Yeah, we'll just do a last 2-minute break and then move on to the how to fix this crap.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
Alright, see you in 2 minutes. Bye-bye.
All right, and we're back. Okay, so I just want to first say that the next area, while may seem a bit dreary and dark, know that I don't mean it to be.
That's not what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, I know, but like it's yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
so
I know. It's a topic that needs to be talked about, but I don't like it.
yes. Okay, all right. So what is that topic exactly for the rest of us?
Essentially, for the rest of the episode, we're going to talk about how to try and curb the effects of having a high population. In your opinion, where's the best area to start, if there is one?
Okay, well, all right, this is going to not be a popular opinion at all. At all. It's
Okay.
not popular by any stretch of the imagination.
All right.
I actually think that every single person on the planet Earth should be limited on the number of children they can actually have, regardless if the child dies or not. One child per family until the population gets down to about 1 billion people globally.
That's quite a change.
Yeah, if we're not going to go into orbit, if we're not building orbital platforms, we're not building space stations, we're not having people live in space, then there's no need to have a population as big and as bloated as ours. And in fact, if you think about the quality of life that you could have if you had a smaller population, it would exponentially increase. I mean, we're moving towards automation when it comes to most industrial jobs. Most jobs that people will go to a factory and do some menial work, those days are rapidly coming to an end where those jobs are even viable anyways. Which means that what are those people going to do? The people who don't only have a high school education at best, and don't have any particular set of skills. Those people just meant to starve and go to the streets because they're not going to be jobs for them. So,
unfortunately not.
So I think that like one of the biggest things that we can do is just stop creating this cycle of people who are born to be disposable. I mean, there's vast portions of the world that literally have children, have large numbers of people just because they're fighting off infections, fighting off diseases, fighting off etc. a number of things, right? And here's the reason why I know that their particular opinion is unpopular. I think it violates basic freedoms, first of all. So in the United States, those of whom are like, I live in the land of the free, I do whatever the fuck I want to do. Like, I'm an American. I believe in freedom and stuff like that. But I also think that like, if us being free goes, the Earth is only going to be around for about 1,000 more years where it's habitable, or you can do what everyone else needs to fucking do and get with the program, and then we get a lot longer. But I'm going to go with, let's do whatever the fuck we need to do to get with the program. Otherwise, those countries are all going to fight us. And while the U.S. stands a 50-50 chance of beating the entire world in a war, where it was fighting everybody, which is kind of crazy to think about, the fact that we have a 50-50 chance, I still don't think 50-50 chance is still a good thing. And then we become subjected to the whims of other countries and powers. That's not a position any of us wants to be in. So that's one thing I would say definitively. The other thing I also kind of think is that if we're not going to take the whole we'll curtail the number of children, then let's really start to put our assets into allowing other places to be habitable. I'm saying let's make Mars habitable. That's going to take about 1,000 years to make it habitable. Let's get on that now. Let's get like actual space stations. Let's actually get like giant things and get them to the point where there's a motivation to do that, instead of having people live in squalor and have the inability to even pursue ambitions. People who are stuck in such a horrible thing that like it's just, a nightmare situation. Who wants to live in a nightmare? I wouldn't want to wake up and go, every day is going to be the same. I'm going to live in shit. I'm going to probably die young, and all of my children are going to die, or most of them are going to die, to something that can be helped by simply, having access to fresh water. It's like, that would be a horrible existence. And what kind of world are we really saying we're okay with by allowing that to be the case?
No. At least I hope not.
Yeah.
I hope for most people that's a no.
Yeah. Well, what's another thing that we need to discuss?
Yeah, so that's talking about, birth control, terraforming.
Mhm.
What about other areas? Maybe like education,
Yes.
sanitation, stuff
Okay,
like
I'm going to speak to the women of the world here.
that?
Okay, I want every single woman in the world to listen to what I have to say, which I know is unrealistic, and there's like what?
Well, you've got one.
Okay, I have one. All right, one. I'll take one. All right.
One is better than none.
Well, you're already
I hope.
educated. You're educated. It doesn't matter. You know what? You are the embodiment of exactly what I'm talking about here.
Aw.
Yeah, become educated. Women, I mean, men too, but like especially women. And I don't mean like go necessarily get a higher level education, like a college degree. That's not what I mean necessarily. Although that's not necessarily a bad thing either. What I'm saying is that understand as much about the world as you possibly can, so that way you can make conscious decisions to make a change in the world that is actually going to be for the better. There's a study that says that women who are educated are more likely to use contraception. Excuse me. I have to anyways.
No, you're good.
Yeah. Okay. Use contraception when having sexual intercourse. More likely to not get pregnant, and are more likely to have less children overall than women who are not. I think this is something that means that there's more women who are educated realize there's more in life to offer than just simply having children. And I think that that's something that all women should really have a chance at exploring. I definitely do believe that women should have the right to do whatever the fuck they want, just like I think men should have the right to do whatever the fuck they want. And I do think that the family values of a man and a woman in a relationship, producing children and whatnot, I think is a good thing. But I also think that that is not a good thing if it comes at the cost of the world, and it shouldn't happen at the cost of, I'm going to have 20 children just to have 3 live. I don't think that's a good thing either. And so I think that's what I'm truly trying to get at here when it comes to education is understand the world, understand your role in it, understand what you want to do, and find ways of being able to self-fulfill yourself. So that way your only achievement is not I had kids. It's I had kids and I learned something about the world and I helped my community and I did X, Y, and Z. All right. So that's
Just settle you for one thing.
Yeah, don't settle for one thing. Every person in this world has the ability to go do a whole bunch of things. And I think that this is true of guys as well, but I think women are the gatekeepers because let's face it, no human being on this planet didn't pass through a woman's vagina at some point in their life. All right? That's how we all got here, folks. No mystery about this. Women are really the gatekeepers when it comes to the amount of people on the planet. So, women, I'm not saying this is your fault, but I'm also saying, hey, you have the power to do something about it. Okay, so what's the next thing?
Yeah, what about sanitation and stuff like that? You've gone into a bit of detail before, but is there anything else you want to add?
Nope. I think fresh water, clean your hands, have an actual crop, irrigate things properly, are really the only things. Huh?
Sorry, it's just all these things we can try to improve on. It just sounds like somebody needs to give reality a patch update.
Yes, that's exactly right. What are we on? What's the patch date right now? What are the patch notes?
1.2.
Really?
Wait.
1.2? Wait, what?
No, that was last year. Never mind.
Oh, dark.
We're on we need okay, right now is I think 1.3. We need 1.4 immediately.
Oh God. Oh no. Anyways, I just think that the fundamental thing that I'd like to leave everyone with is this. The world, by some would be suggested as it's in a bad spot, and I'm not denying that. But I also don't think that it's hopeless. I don't think that we're in a predicament that can't be reversed. And so what I would say is that for all of you guys out there who have any ability in any way, shape, or form to enact change in even the mildest of ways, I would say do so. If your family's saying, hey, have 3 kids, maybe only have 2. Next time you reach for that water bottle and you're like, I could get a refillable one, or I could get, just one that lasts for a long while. Maybe get the one that lasts for a little while, maybe save some plastic, make less problems. And when you get the opportunity to help someone out, maybe you should take it instead of saying you'll do it next time. with all that being said, I just want to say thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. I look forward to Wednesday's episode. We're going to talk about food, folks.
Yeah.
All the deliciousness of food. See you guys all in the next one. Later, everybody.